And I think it's important to kind of have a 360 approach when it comes to building a brand, so that at the end of the day, we don't own our own channel, our social media channel. So if that goes away, where is your community going to be able to find you? So that's the first thing, really, just being able to kind of keep my audience engaged and so they know where to find me, whether it's on Instagram or on my website or where else.
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning to the Why Influence podcast, where we interview influencers about their why and their motivation for influencing. I'm your host, Jeremy Siegel. Today, our guest is Coco Bassey. Coco has over 175,000 Instagram followers in the fashion niche. She shares a ton of value in this interview, so let's just jump into it.
Welcome to the Why Influence podcast, where we deep dive into the why behind some of the world's most influential people. Why do you influence? Why are you an influencer? We hope to inspire you to share your voice with the world. And now, your host, Jeremy Siegel.
Coco, thanks for coming on the show. Before we jump into your why, I'd like to ask you a few questions so our audience can learn a little bit more about you. Can you tell us a little about your personal and professional background, what you did before doing your social media influence?
Sure. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be on your podcast today. Yeah, so I guess just thinking about like my background, I went to school actually for international studies, and to kind of take it a step even further back, I grew up, both my parents were diplomats and we moved around a lot growing up. So I lived in Prague for 6 years, Berlin for 4. We lived in Nigeria for 4 years, and Canada for about 4 years as well. So we kind of did a lot of hopping around. This is while I was in college. My dad was working in Hong Kong, so I would spend holidays there. And then my mom, her last post was in Atlanta, and that's really how Atlanta became our home base. And she was here while I was in college. So that's kind of where my international background came into play. And I thought that I was really going to go down that same road that my parents did, because that was really what I knew. And I actually admired, their jobs and just kind of having that opportunity to grow up in an international environment. And then throughout college, taking a couple classes, I did some internships, and that was kind of where I got introduced into the world of marketing and just everything associated with that on the creative end when it comes to writing, graphic design, web design, and then of course kind of the more strategic end of, you're thinking about lead generation and sales and all of that kind of stuff. And I actually really, really liked it. That was kind of what led me down my career path. I still have a professional job. I work as a product marketing manager for a software company. While I do love what I do professionally, I feel, I always just felt that I was lacking something on the creative end. So a lot of what I do professionally is still very strategic, and I feel like, I still needed some kind of creative outlet. In 2013, this is kind of a year after I moved back to Atlanta after grad school, I basically started my blog. And really from the very get-go, I didn't want to be the face of it. I actually wanted my younger sister to be the face of it. And I just really wanted to do everything in the background, the writing. I love photography. But then she ended up moving to LA. I knew this was something I still really wanted to do. So I turned the camera on myself, and it just kind of took off from there.
So what prompted you to start your creative journey for sharing on your blog and, starting your Instagram account?
Yeah, so I know fashion has always been an interest of mine. It's, it's a part of everyone's day-to-day life, whether, you want to admit it or not. Like even people who say they don't like fashion, we're all getting dressed on a day-to-day basis. And we all know, things that we like and things that we don't like. And especially when I started, there was a really big online fashion community, and I knew that was where I wanted to start. But I knew that wasn't all I wanted to do. I wanted to do something more in terms of creating a community, being able to speak to like more than just, what I'm getting dressed in every day. I think that really followed the trend that we've kind of seen across the board, where beauty YouTubers are doing travel, and travel YouTubers are, showing you their homes. And So just kind of taking things to the next level and showing that 360 view on, what life is like. And I try, to the best of my ability to show that, it's not just the nice clothes and everything, but it's kind of, I get a lot of questions about how I manage my blog along with my full-time job. So I try to relate to my readers in that way. I get a lot of DMs about asking for tips and stuff, whether, it's on like from a fashion point of view or kind of on a more personal end professionally, or, for just tips on how to, make the connections that, my followers want to make to come up in the fashion world as well. And so that's really, I think for me, the real big goal here is just community building.
Okay, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
So how soon after starting your blog did you start doing your Instagram?
I think it really started hand in hand. I actually always had an Instagram account. I think I opened my Instagram account in 2011. So I had it before I started blogging, and it was personal back then. Sure, if you scroll all the way down, you'll see like some of my more personal posts that was just, me and my friends and whatever. But yeah, I've always had an Instagram account. And I think I kind of actually from the beginning, I went back and forth on whether I wanted to create a second Instagram account for my blog. But I think at that point, I felt like I didn't want to start from the ground up again. And so I basically just kind of started to integrate my blog into my Instagram, and now my friends all know, okay, this is what Coco does. So
right,
yeah.
All right, so when you started out and started your blog, I mean, you've got a marketing background, you're a strategic person. Was it a conscious choice for you to start having more impact and have more of a social media influence when you it was?
Yeah, it definitely was, and I think that's a big part of why I still have my full-time job up till now. I mean, starting out, I know a lot of girls who kind of, just dive right in and go like quit their jobs and go full-time. But for me, from day one, it was always super important to me to be able to invest back into my business. There are a lot of costs that are associated with creating online content that, the average person doesn't know about when it comes to production costs, photography, even just like having an up and running website that works well on a day-to-day basis. And those were like, a lot of those costs were things that, I was able to fund like through my full-time job. And it's been really helpful, even when it I guess when I also think beyond like the financial investment side of things, I also was kind of keeping my ears to the ground to see like who are the movers and shakers in the digital fashion media industry that I, would want to connect with and introduce myself to, or people that would be able to tell me or kind of guide me through things on like in a more strategic way. So I don't feel like I'm just winging it on a day-to-day basis. So it's definitely been a good mix of, that financial investment on my end, and then also networking within the industry. I think that there isn't enough of an emphasis put on that. A lot of people think that influencers just get started and then free things arrive at their doorstep every day. Mm-hmm. But a big part of it really is those organic relationships that you're making along the way. And a lot of that work that you're doing isn't paid and isn't, like you're not seeing money coming into your bank because of, the fact that you are trying to create this relationship with a brand. So you're featuring them and creating content for them in a more organic way that's not paid. But in the end, long term, that's the kind of thing that will pay off.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were growing your channel, you were networking in a way to grow it. You weren't really networking as a result of your channel, such as like you were trying to meet people that maybe had more influence to partner with them in some way versus, just trying to make money right off the get-go.
I think it was a little bit a mix of the two. I mean, when I'm thinking about how I want to grow my account, it's definitely taking feedback from my readers to know what it is they want to see from me, first of all. Second of all, just knowing that, there are people, whether it's, the talent management agencies or PR agencies that are running these campaigns that, I would want to get to know. So then I'm sending my media kit out to them and trying to take these in-person meetings so I can meet them face to face.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of it. And then
So it's opened a lot of doors for you.
yeah, absolutely, I would say that.
So you started your blog and your Instagram as like a creative outlet. That's the reason for starting out. So what would you say your reason is for continuing today? Like, has that reason changed for you?
Not too much, honestly. I think a number of reasons, really. First of all, it's my love of creating. That's always, I think, the day that goes away, then I know that, this isn't going to be for me anymore. I just enjoy, and I'm always constantly trying to challenge myself to learn something new, whether it's even though I am, the face that's in front of a lot of my photos, like, I'm also learning a lot of things when it comes to photography as well. So my sister does a lot of my photos, and neither of us came from a professional photography background. And so when I was purchasing the camera that I was using for my business, we were learning this together. And I think that that's a skill that I'm always, constantly continuing to try to improve and trying to challenge myself in different ways. Really, it's, just me loving what it is that I do. And then kind of speaking on from a grander scheme, and I'm thinking of why. I think when it comes to the influencer space, especially in fashion, there's still a huge need for better representation, more diversity. Right. I've had the opportunity to work with some brands that I really love, and there are still brands that, that are kind of still on my bucket list, and I see the roster of girls that they're working with. And, it's even in 2019, it's not diverse. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, well, I mean, who knows? We'll see like what happens if that opportunity would present itself, down the road. But from a general sense, I think that I want to be able to use my platform to kind of bring a different perspective, just a different point of view to this industry.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of areas lack diversity, so I like that that's one of your driving factors as well.
Thank you.
So It sounds like when you were starting out, you wanted to be behind the scenes, you wanted your sister to be the face, and when she moved away, it sort of forced you to be the face of what you're doing. So
yeah.
So do you mind going into any like personal or physical barriers that you had to overcome during your journey to build influence?
Yeah, sure. I mean, starting out, it was always super awkward whenever we were out taking photos because, I mean, as we know, when it comes to shooting street style, you're literally doing it in public, on the street, around people. Starting out, I just felt super awkward whenever anyone would walk by. And obviously that would like translate onto the photos when I'm like doing weird things with my face. I think, like 5 going on 6 now years in, I'm definitely a lot more comfortable when it comes to photography, and I will shoot like any place, anywhere. So that's totally fine. But I think my challenge right now is really with video, and that's kind of, talking to the screen. And I think that's really the next step of being able to relate with my audience, because I think photos only do so much. And I think, when you kind of look at the influencer space, a lot of those who are doing really well and are just really, really connected to their audience, they're usually really active on YouTube or really active on Instagram stories. And that's because, when you're kind of speaking to your audience, they feel a lot more connected to you than they do through a photo. So that's kind of my new challenge that I'm trying to get over. I've been doing like a little bit of video here and there, but I think that that's really where I'm looking to grow over the next few months.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually watched some of your videos and I thought you looked really comfortable.
Thank you.
So stepping back a little bit, when you were feeling awkward taking pictures in public when you were first starting out, what do you think contributed towards your capacity to overcome that fear?
I think a big part of it is practice, just continuing to put yourself out there and just continuing to expose yourself to the thing that you're scared to do, really. And then you just kind of get over it. It really is more of like a mental block. I think a lot of that might even be like internal as well. So like sometimes like when I'm doing video, for example, I'm like, oh my God, this is not interesting. Who cares about this? And then sometimes I won't post it. I've held back a lot, but then sometimes I'll like post one thing and then people are like, can we see more? Or like, you need to post this more. Like, okay, people actually are interested in it. So sometimes it's kind of this mental block that I know I need to get over. And then from like a photography standpoint, it's like, okay, does this actually look good? Like, do like, does the person that's like walking down the street towards us while we're shooting think that we're like looking stupid, just taking photos in the middle of the street? So yeah, a lot of that is kind of just personal insecurities. And I think the thing to really do is just challenge yourself to get over it, because I think it's also really a lesson in, boosting your own personal confidence and, what it is you're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, like you said, when we're talking about the whys, I have a goal in mind. And, while this photo that we're shooting, is just a little part of it, it still is a part of what's going to build that grand idea that I have. So, yeah.
Okay. So it actually sounds like a lot of the tips you used back then for getting comfortable with pictures is stuff that you can apply to really a lot of situations. And one that came to mind was video. It takes a lot of practice, put yourself out there, expose yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Well, since you brought it up, do you mind sharing a little bit more about your grander vision for what it is that you are looking to grow into in the future?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's, I'm still trying to figure out exactly where the influencer space is going. I think that's really one big thing that's been top of mind for a lot of people in this digital space, especially with so many changes happening on Instagram. And I think that there is a pretty big population of people who aren't happy with a lot of these changes. And people think that, they're basically looking to see what's next when it comes to social media. And I think for me, when I'm thinking about what that next step is going to be, I want to have an audience of people that isn't necessarily bound to my Instagram feed. And so that's why, a lot of influencers do use Instagram as their main or only channel, but that's kind of why I still have my website up and running, and why, I'm trying to diversify, on YouTube and Facebook and some of these other, channels that a lot of people may not necessarily still be that active on. I think it's important to kind of have a 360 approach when it comes to building a brand, so that at the end of the day, we don't own our own channel, our social media channel. So if that goes away, where is your community going to be able to find you? So that's the first thing, really, just being able to kind of keep my audience engaged and so they know where to find me, whether it's on Instagram or on my website or where else. And then when I think of the value I want to bring long term, I've gone back and forth on whether it's a product or some sort of service that I want to come out with eventually. And I'm still trying to figure out what exactly that is. I know a lot of bloggers come out with clothing lines, and I don't know that that's exactly, while fashion is a big part of what I love, I don't know that that's exactly where I see myself. I'm thinking of something that might be a little bit more, that might speak a little bit more to personal growth, whether it's professional or, kind of more on the mental health area as well. I don't know. So I'm still trying to figure out what that is, but I definitely am thinking long-term, some sort of product or service that will really resonate with, what my followers love about me and what I know they need too.
Yeah, I love that. So you started out with a passion, which is the clothing and fashion, and then you're gonna, at some point, you've got some desire to shift to more of an impact that's something that's more meaningful to you, like personal growth, mental health, and things of that nature.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think it's a great idea for diversifying. I mean, it's hard to have everyone on one platform, and then it's hard to move people from platforms to other platforms.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you mind sharing if you have any strategies or plans for, maybe the next step? It sounds like YouTube might be that, but if you started going full force in YouTube, what would be your strategy? Or it doesn't have to be YouTube, but whatever your next platform is that you want to focus on, do you have any strategies that you'd be using to try to drive traffic to that?
Yeah, I think the big thing about it is giving your audience a reason why they should, because if they're following you already on Instagram, then what is it that you have to offer them on a different channel that they're not getting off of your Instagram feed? So a big part of that is, exclusive content that actually brings value. So it's not just something that's just not like intentionally done. I think that there really has to be intention behind it. If I'm trying to do something new or trying to drive my audience from one platform to another to follow me, I think that it would really mean that I would have to be giving them some sort of reason. So I know on Instagram, a big part of what I do is with photos. And, my hope with YouTube is to be able to connect with them in a more personal way. To obviously like speak more, show them maybe like my day to day. I think that would be something that would be really cool to show, because unlike a lot of fashion influencers, I do have a full-time job. So what actually does a regular day in my life look like, when I'm actually getting up on a Monday morning and going to work, not, getting up and sitting on my computer to, crank out the next blog post, because I'm usually managing all of that during the weekend. So my schedule is a little bit.
And waking up at 6:30 or 7 to do a podcast interview before your job.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's basically what my schedules look like. And a lot of the times I have a brand consultant that I work with as well. And our meetings are happening, like around this time. She's also based in Europe, so it works for her on at a more reasonable hour. But I'm up at like 5 or 6 prepping for the call. And then by the time 8 rolls around, I'm heading out the door to go to work.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that. Because it is unique. I mean, there's not a lot of people that grow such large audience and are still, working in their jobs. And I think that a lot of people would like to see that, because it's sort of a side hustle.
Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about who you were before you started your blog and you started your Instagram related to your blog to who you are today, how has this journey changed you? You talked about how you're maybe more comfortable in front of the camera and things of that nature, but can you maybe explain like some differences from who you were back then to who you are today as a result of doing this?
Sure. I think a big thing that I've really seen in myself from a personal growth standpoint, has been, I think from a general point of view, like when you look at influencers and extract all of the BS when you see, like all the scandals and stuff online, but like the people who are doing it really well and telling their own stories, it is really phenomenal to just see how alike a lot of women's journeys are when they kind of speak about their personal issues and things along those lines. It's just been really cool to connect with people in that way. And I think that there are some issues that for me seem to be not like a huge factor in my life growing up, especially because we moved around a lot and we always went to international schools. So for me, before we moved to the US, diversity wasn't really a concept that I ever thought was an issue. Growing up, my best friends were from Europe and Asia and South America, and I still have friends that live all over the world. And so the idea of someone being a minority or feeling that way and all of the things that come along with it, like that wasn't something that ever really registered to me. But I think that having started my own channel and kind of seeing, what other people are going through, connecting with my readers to see what their experiences are, I think it's really keyed me into some of these social issues that, really should be on my radar and are on my radar now. And I've kind of been a lot more mindful about how I speak on those issues and how I'm using my platform to kind of lend my support for people who, are not as fortunate as me or, my average reader. But there are some people that, are living in my home country in Nigeria that probably aren't able to afford half of the things that, I'm promoting on my channel. So the question is, how am I relating to them? Is there anything that I'm doing to give back in any sort of way? And so a lot of those things are, what I'm really trying to be a lot more mindful of. So I think that's probably been the biggest thing that I've seen in myself from a personal growth standpoint. And then I think as well, another thing is just my personal confidence, just speaking on that generally. I mean, I think it's not everyone that can start a business that ends up being successful, or that you can end up like out earning your salary, on something that you're busy doing on weeknights and weekends. So I think that that's been really cool to see, something that I've done basically from the ground up on my own, totally self-funded. So that's been really cool too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've got one of my best friends is actually a German diplomat, so I've seen some of his world, and yeah, it's such a different world growing up,
Yeah, it
living
is.
in like that international culture, and then you come to America. It's interesting how America is seen as this place with all this diversity, and that you're realizing the struggle here when
Yeah,
you've lived in so many places.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that, if any of those Nigerian people are listening, they should be subscribing to your YouTube channel, because that's where a lot of your value is coming. If they can't afford, some of the things that you're posting on Instagram, there's going to be a lot of value coming from your YouTube channel. So shout out to that.
Yeah. That's the goal.
As far as people you've influenced, is there a memorable story that comes to mind for someone who's contacted you and said like how much you've had an impact on them?
Yeah, I do get DMs like that every now and then. I think from a lot of times it's, people feeling inspired by my style, but I think something that really touched me was someone who wrote to me, and she was really interested in influencers in general. She told me how she follows like some girls that I follow as well, but one of the things that she really liked about me was, first of all, just kind of seeing the more realistic standpoint of what it means to actually have a full-time job while you're building a business, because it may seem like the easy thing to do to like go full-time right away, but honestly that's not realistic for everyone, and everyone's situation is really different. And then another thing that she said that I really liked was the fact that she just enjoyed the fact that I'm not like overly done up. And that's not to like put down, like I watch makeup YouTube videos like all day every day. Like I'm always trying to learn something new on how to like do my makeup better, or learning beauty tips here and there. But I can't remember exactly what it was she said, but it was just something along the lines of that she liked the fact that I was using my platform to promote like a more natural kind of beauty. And I really liked that, because for me, like, while personal appearance is a big part obviously of my personal brand, since I'm the face of it, I think that just being able to portray, even if I'm not like saying it out loud, but to portray to my readers that the way you are is enough, and like who you are, like you don't have to like feel like you need to change or paint yourself up to be a totally different person to be successful, or to feel that you are okay. I really like that was the message that she was taking away from my content.
Yeah, that's awesome. And she obviously understood your world, because she followed a lot of people that are influencers in your space.
Yeah,
and so that's
exactly.
a huge compliment.
Yeah.
So, as you know, social media influence is a lot of work. And have you ever struggled with motivation? And if so, do you mind sharing an example of a time you struggled and how you powered through it?
Yeah, I will definitely say that. I think that there are times of the year that things get really, really busy for me at work, like my 9 to 5, and then things are also picking up with blogging, and it just gets to be a lot, to the point where I'm like, I don't know like what I should do. Should I quit one or the other? Like what's really going to make sense for me here? And I remember one time, like I was in Paris, and I was with my photographer, and we were just kind of talking through blogging in general, and like, so I told her just straight up, I was like, sometimes it feels really, really vapid to just be like in an outfit, like posing on the streets, and we're just like shooting another look, for another brand. And it's like, okay, what is the point of this? Like, where is this going? Like, what is the end goal here? And sometimes, when I feel like when the end goal is still like in sight and I'm not quite there yet, I can be a little bit impatient. And I think that was kind of a little bit what I was feeling at the time. It's kind of like, okay, what's next after all of these outfits and the amazing travel experiences and all of that? And I think that, what really helped me at that point was to just kind of actually have a journal where I have my whys written down. And that was an exercise I did with my brand manager a few months ago. We kind of walked through, and every now and then we'll kind of go through and refresh it too. Kind of walk through, okay, what's the why, and like what are we doing to meet that? And one of the things that she's actually challenged me with was to, if you really are trying to relate to the everyday girl, why don't you show a little bit more of your everyday life? So the beautiful photos are great and all, but sometimes people like want to see like the real stuff. Like, okay, you're at work and maybe you're not dressed to the nines like you usually would be on like a weeknight or weekend. So why don't you actually show that side of it? Because probably like half of like more majority of your followers look exactly the same way you do, at 10 a.m. on a Monday morning. And so that's really what would help them to relate with you more. And so I think just really by going back to what the reason why I'm doing this, sometimes, when I'm doing some of those smaller menial tasks on a day-to-day, it feels like I'm not getting there. But I think, when I just kind of think of that overall strategy and the steps that I need to, and the work I need to put in, that's kind of what keeps me going.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So having your why really clear and evolving that why as you go through everything.
Mm-hmm.
Your brand manager sounds like she helps you a lot with just
she does, yeah.
keeping you accountable and pushing you to be more authentic.
Yes, definitely.
That's great. A random question just came up, which is, what does your work think about your side hustle? I didn't talk about that, but
yeah. So I actually don't really talk about it much at work, but then there's always the inevitable moments when people find out and they're like, oh my God, what are you still doing here? I get that question a lot. Like, what are you still doing here at work? Like, go, like you should be like out there and, just like building this awesome thing that you've done. And I mean, that's not to say that at some point I won't. Like, I mean, at this point, I've already, as of last year, I out earned my annual salary from blogging. So, I mean, it's not to say
congratulations.
Thank you. So it's definitely not to say that that won't happen at some point, but I think that for me, I want to do it smartly. So not just in a way that I'm just going to like up and leave, but kind of make sure that if that happens, like I'm doing it at the right time that I know works for me. So, I mean, generally they've been pretty supportive. I always try to make sure that, when I'm booking a campaign that involves travel, it really does mean that I'm checking in and taking PTO or checking in with my boss. And sometimes even for projects that I'm doing based here in Atlanta, like if I'm, for example, working from home, a big part of that means that I have to be a lot more responsible and making sure that, I'm prioritizing the right way to make sure that the work that I have to do is getting done, and that my colleagues don't feel like Coco's not like keeping up with her work and responsibilities because she's probably traveling again or something along those lines. That's definitely like the last thing I would want my coworkers to feel. So I've always been really, really mindful of that. And yeah, I think it's going well so far.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that because I'm sure there's a lot of people that were curious how that relationship was handled.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not something that I like really publicize that much, but like if anyone at work ever asks me about it, I'm always happy to talk about it. But I try to make sure it's not like something that's distracting me or my colleagues from like our day to day.
That's good. So moving on here, what's your favorite part about being a content creator?
For me, it's the creative process, really. I don't think that it's anything that I'm ever going to get over. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I've always had a video editor that I pass off my footage to, and he's done a lot of like my video editing for me. But then I had a project a few weeks ago that had like a 2-day deadline, and part of those deliverables was video, and he was busy. He is like based in Europe. So like he's like on a totally different time zone, and sometimes he's not available for like those quick turnaround projects. And so I literally just like hopped on YouTube and put on a Premiere Pro tutorial and ended up like editing the video myself. And I think that like that kind of took me back to when I was starting out with blogging and learning photography, when a lot of that was really just going step by step and learning like literally what does this button do and what does this control do and how do I do the most basic thing, like import a file to this program. I like just being able to like complete that process and have it result in something that I actually really, really liked. That just like took me back to, another part of like why I'm doing all this. And it's just like really enjoying that learning process and enjoying the creative process of content creation.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So for someone who is not an influencer, or maybe someone in the early stage of influencing, what would be some advice that you give this person?
So someone that wants to start out?
Yeah, someone that has desire to have more impact in their life.
Yeah, so I think a question, I get that question a lot, but the way I get it phrased towards me is totally wrong. Because a lot of people ask, how do I work with brands? And the problem is that that's a very self-serving reason to want to get into this digital content space, because for you to say, okay, how do I work with a brand? That means it's pretty self-serving. Like, for extreme example, like, how do I get a Chanel bag to promote on my feed? Like, who is that serving? It really is just serving yourself, because you're showing your readers this fancy new bag that you have, but it's not really giving them anything. For me, I think the reason, like, or whenever I get those kind of questions, I always ask, hey, like, what do your friends come to you for whenever they want advice? Like, what value do you think that you would be able to bring to your audience beyond, like the beautiful photos? What would people relate to you? Like, even if your whole wardrobe was gone tomorrow, like, why would they come and see what you're all about? Until you're able to answer that question, I don't think that anyone's really ready to start. Because being an influencer, like, when you really think of what the term influence is, it's a lot of responsibility. Sometimes that gets a little bit lost because it started to become a lot more monetized these days. And so we see people just pumping out one ad after the other without really being mindful of their audience, or how, like, this brand relationship links back to the reason why they started out in the first place. But I think that, calling yourself an influencer is saying that you have influence in some way. I think that that's a really, really big responsibility, and that should always be your first priority. Like, okay, what am I telling my audience today? What am I sharing? Like, is it something positive? Is it something that will impact them in, even if it's in the smallest way? And that doesn't mean that every single post has to be like full of like meaning and emotion and everything like that. But yeah, I just think at the end of the day, you really have to think about your why. And yeah, you and I just kind of went over that at the beginning of our chat. I think that if you have like 2 to 3 really solid reasons of why you feel that, you want to start a platform where people should listen to you, then you should definitely have a reason why they should want to do that.
I like that. So it comes up a lot, but you need a really good, authentic why of why you're doing what you're doing, because really that's gonna, if someone's just looking to get like a purse to showcase, that's not going to keep them motivated and give them big purpose long term. So they need a good reason that pushes them through with some momentum.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's great advice for someone who is, since Instagram's your largest platform, let's focus on that. But for someone who has an established Instagram account, do you have any advice for how they can level up? Like, maybe something that you feel like you're doing differently than the average Instagram influencer. Do you have any advice for someone who is already established and wants to grow their Instagram influence?
I think there are a number of ways to do this. First would be collaborating with other creators in your niche, or in the niche that you're looking to reach out to. I think that's always a good way to go. I've started working with some of my friends here in Atlanta who are also bloggers. Sometimes we'll like shoot each other or share each other on our pages. I think that's always a really good way to kind of just show your readers, hey, this is someone that, that I hang out with. And that's kind of a way to help your readers discover new people too. And I just think from a general standpoint, because fashion itself is such a relationship-based industry, like it's a really good way to grow organically too. So that's probably one way I would say. I think a lot of growing influencers are still really stuck on, this image or perfection. So like staging the perfect photo, and that, if they're not like perfectly done up for the day, like the photo is just not going on their feed at all, And so I think that, I would just challenge creators in general to think beyond that and share something that's a little bit more personal with your readers. I think people really, really respond to that. There used to be people used to just shy away from like the longer captions, but I actually find myself, especially if it's for a creator or an influencer that I follow and enjoy, like I'll actually open up the caption and like read it in full. And sometimes it's something that's really impactful. And that's like the thing that will motivate me to want to leave a comment, to engage, ask questions to your readers. If you're traveling somewhere new, like there's like more often than not, you'll have readers that have been to that place and are like dying to give you tips, and that's always a really great way to engage with your readers. Just be more like kind of drop the facade of like trying to be perfect. And if you have a question for your readers, ask it. If you want to share something, you know, that's really going on in your life, you should share it, because more often than not, people will relate to that. And that's, I mean, as we know, Instagram is all based on engagement, and it's really those real moments that drive engagement.
Yeah, those are some valuable tips. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Of course.
And of course, I appreciate you coming here and sharing your why. So
I'd like to
end the episode by giving you an opportunity to talk about your brand, your social accounts, your online store, anything else you'd like to share with the audience.
Oh, yeah, of course. So my blog, it's called Millennial, which I guess, again, kind of speaks to that, to my whys from a grander scheme. So millennial being kind of a feminine spin on the term millennial. And so my goal has always been to create content for the everyday millennial woman. And that's really my goal. And so that's my website, millennial.com. I'm on Instagram at Coco Bassey, and YouTube as well is Coco Bassey. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links to all your social accounts and your website and your YouTube on our page.
Okay.
But Coco, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you have a great remainder of 2019. I look forward to seeing your influence keep on growing.
Thank you so much.
Well, that concludes the interview. Thanks so much for listening to the interview in its entirety. Coco, thanks again for coming on the podcast and being vulnerable and sharing your why. I think it's amazing now, as of a year ago, Coco has out-earned her work salary through her Instagramming and blogging. I'm looking forward to bringing Coco back onto the show sometime in the future, whenever she decides she wants to make that transition to following her passions and pursuing her influence more full-time. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty amazing what she's accomplished so far, and that she's done it while also having a full-time job. So if your excuse is that you don't have time to put into this, well, I think Coco just proved that you can do this even if you don't have a lot of time. Coco talked about some of the benefits that she's had through her influence. It's opened a lot of doors for having conversations with other influencers or for collaborating on projects, as well as getting sponsors. And you even heard that she has some sponsors on the radar, so she's keeping an eye out for ones that she wants. She's worked with some that she likes to continue working with, but it's just opened doors across the board for her doing this influence. Coco, as a brand manager, someone who helps really clearly define her why. They can redefine her why. The brand manager can keep her accountable for the goals that she has. It's just good to have someone like that to help you through your process, someone you can bounce ideas off of, someone who can keep you accountable. That comes up a lot, and I just want to make note of that. Now, Coco has quite a bit of influence with over 175,000 Instagram followers, but she's not very diversified on other platforms, and that's something that she is going to be focusing on in the future. She doesn't want to be bound by her Instagram feed. She wants to share more than just fashion. She wants to get more into the impact, and she wants to get more into her long-term vision, which is maybe more towards personal growth or mental health, or something that can have more impact, something where she has more impact and influence than just the fashion space. That's what she's trying to do with YouTube, and that's what she's trying to do with these other platforms, and branch out so that she can have something that's more fulfilling long term for her. Now, onto the advice. Coco, just like a lot of people we've had on here, had to overcome a lot of fears. And for her, in the early stages, it was taking pictures in public. You know, she's taking pictures for her Instagram account, and she's doing that publicly. Some people may be looking or being like, who's that person, or what she's doing. And she's overcome that just through a lot of practice, putting yourself out there, exposing yourself to the fear, and overcoming that mental block. Now she claims that she's doing that with video, although I've watched some of her videos and she seems pretty comfortable, so maybe she's working over the mental block part now. Whatever the case may be, it's just a good advice for everyone to know that it just takes practice to overcome that fear. Coco talked a lot about finding your authentic why before starting your influence. Why do your friends come to you for advice, or what value do you have? You know, just find your authentic why. What are you good at? What are you passionate about? And what do other people perceive you being good at? And then figuring that out so that you can focus on something that's going to be motivating long term. She said that was a very valuable thing that she did, and that she's actually working on a pivot at some point in the future to getting to something that's more long-term vision than her fashion, which is also a passion, but she wants to get into something that has a little bit more of a worldly impact, I think. Coco said not to focus too much on perfection, just take a bunch of content and you're just like, oh, it's no good, let's trash it. It's probably better to just take the best one that's there and post it and just put the content out there and then keep going and grow from it. Because Coco's focused on Instagram, she gave the suggestion that you shouldn't shy away from long caption posts. It motivates engagement. You can ask a question, you can share a story, you can motivate people. Post a picture, and then you can put a paragraph, multiple paragraphs, a book into the description, and some people are going to read that and it's going to have an impact on people. So don't shy away from leaving long captions on your Instagram posts. Now, moving on to me and my journey here with the Why Influence podcast, I asked Coco for some constructive criticism or feedback at the end of the episode, and she didn't have any, and that means a lot to me. She said that she liked it, and that makes me feel pretty good. She didn't really have anything that she could say that I could improve on, which means that it's going to be more on me and self-assessing myself to find things to get better at, but I did a good job in her eyes. I thought I did a pretty good job. There were a couple moments where I stumbled over my words, and I noticed a few moments where I didn't transition smoothly, but overall I'm pretty happy with my performance on this interview. I do think I can bring a little bit more energy and more expressed passion. I'm obviously passionate about this topic. I'm passionate about these people's stories. Coco's an amazing person, and she shared some awesome stuff. So I think that's something I'm going to work on in the future, is trying to bring more energy to the table and bring more of my passion so I can keep this more engaging for you guys. I'd like to make the point that this podcast has opened doors for me to have this conversation. It would have never happened if I didn't have this podcast. I actually reached out to her a while back and asked her if she'd be willing to do an interview. And this was before I launched the podcast. And she was like, hey, I don't know, maybe after you launch your podcast, so just get back to me. And I reached out to her again after I had 10 interviews live. And then she was like, yeah, I'm down. She scheduled and we did the interview. But I would have never made it a point to reach out to Coco and have this conversation and do an interview and get this content out for the world if I wasn't doing this podcast. So I sort of feel like it's an accomplishment to find someone as awesome as Coco and extract her story for you guys to listen to, because it's really inspiring, and she's an awesome person. Both her parents are diplomats. She's traveled the world. She's got a very diverse and global mindset around things. She's doing some awesome stuff, and is just someone unique that should be heard. Now, Coco didn't say this, but one day I believe Coco's going to pursue this stuff more full time. And when she does, I really want to bring her back on the podcast and see how her why has evolved at that time, because things change over time. Right now, her influence is mainly Instagram, and it's mostly a side hustle, but she expressed desire to have that why change and for her platforms to change. And she did say she would reach out if and whenever that day comes, which I think it'll come. And that's it. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. If you're a returning listener, then please go to iTunes if you haven't done already and leave us a review. Those reviews help us get bigger and better guests. If you'd like to learn more about Coco, then go to the show notes part of our website. It's whyinfluence.com, whyinfluence.com, episode 14. And we're going to have all the links to Coco's social media accounts and a bunch of show notes in there for you to look at. After we do 30 interviews, Nathan's going to interview me again, and it's going to be live streamed. So if you're going to be notified of when that live stream is going to happen, I don't have a date for that yet, but you can subscribe to our email newsletter on our website, and then we'll notify you. We schedule that. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to the show and listening to the episode in its entirety, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.